Welcome, everyone, to the William J. Abraham Lecture Series. Welcome, everyone, to the William J. Abraham Lecture Series. We're very grateful for your presence today. Ugama Yanis will come up and welcome you, and then I will properly introduce our speaker, John Greco, this afternoon.
Thank you, Fred. Good morning. It is a great honor and a privilege to welcome all of you to Perkins School of Theology, Southern Methodist University. What a blessing to see so many faces, familiar and new faces. Thank you for being here this morning and the rest of the afternoon with us. I really appreciate your presence, and I hope you can enjoy our beautiful campus and this beautiful day. It is truly a blessing to have you, so many of you here at Perkins. It is indeed great to be at Southern Methodist University and at Perkins School of Theology on this day. As you may have heard recently, SMU has been designated as a Research One institution. And for this reason, we are celebrating this wonderful accomplishment. You may ask, what is the role of the School of Theology in reaching R1, Research One status? Well, Perkins contributes in different ways. Primarily, our doctoral degrees do count toward the R1 categorization. And also, if our graduates get higher and get employment quickly, that also helps as well. But also, our research output, our faculty research and grants that they receive, also they contribute to that status as well. But this morning, I want to highlight another aspect that is important in having R1, Research One status. Lectures like the William J. Abraham also provide evidence of academic rigor and the seriousness of our research and scholarship, and theological education, as well as other fields like philosophy and other related fields. For these and other reasons, I am delighted to welcome all of you to Perkins School of Theology, in particular to Dr. John Greco for being here, me, the lecture speaker. And I also want to express my gratitude and appreciation to my friend and colleague, Dr. Fred Aquino, for organizing this event. It's not an easy task, and I want to say thanks to him, and please join me in saying thanks. Thank you, Fred. Fred, I appreciate it. And we have many distinguished guests. I know we have executive board members. Billy's kids are here. We are happy to have them. It's a blessing to see all of them here. Once again, welcome to SMU, Perkins School of Theology, and may your time be enjoyable here on campus. Thank you.
Thank you for being here today. When you plan an event like this, you never know what to expect. And I have to say, I'm grateful for your presence. The focus today is on William J. Abraham, but not in the way you might imagine. This is not a memorial lecture series. This is a series going forward. And the idea here is to create space for interdisciplinary conversations about matters of importance. And we have some philosophers in the room, which I'm very grateful for. Want to create greater relationships on campus with people outside of theology. The goal then is not merely to reflect on the past, which we could certainly do, but to extend and embody the spirit of Billy Abraham. Billy was deeply committed to exploring the intersection of faith and reason. He was interested in many things, but in particular, from my vantage point, robustly committed to the intellectual life. And that's what this lecture series is about. It's not There are other ways to go in this. There are other ways to sort of think about his life. But in this case, we're going to look at the intellectual issues that are before us today, and we have many, and what's happening in our society. I can't think of another person better to connect faith and reason than our speaker, Professor John Greco. John is going to, in his lecture, focus on the topic knowledge of God, and deliberately there is a question mark. And the idea here is to think through the sense in which current work in epistemology applies to religious belief. John holds the Robert and Catherine McDevitt Chair in Philosophy at Georgetown University. Some of his publications include The Transmission of Knowledge, Achieving Knowledge, and Putting Skeptics in Their Place, all published by Cambridge University Press. John has also published many articles in philosophy, well recognized in the world, not only nationally but internationally, as a profoundly committed philosopher, but also a practicing Roman Catholic. Please give a warm welcome to our 2025 Abraham Lecturer, Professor John Greco.
Thanks, Fred. Hi, folks. Thanks so much to Fred Aquino and also the Perkins School of Theology and, of course, Southern Methodist University for having me here. It's a great honor to be here. I met William Abraham only once, but I know his work, and we worked together on a couple of things. And so it's a great honor to be here and to speak on this occasion. So regarding the title, Knowledge of God, you can read that two ways. One way to read it is as a question, but the way that I meant to have it read was like as an expression of surprise. Like, what? Knowledge of God? Because we have a kind of, we're in a kind of time and place right now where someone claiming that they have knowledge of God could raise eyebrows, not just among atheists, but among believers as well. There are plenty of believers who would balk at the idea that they have knowledge of God. But I want to note that we believers that take that attitude have a kind of a double mind in that respect, because we do sort of shy away from those sorts of claims, certainly in academia, certainly in public space, but we don't in our private lives. I mean, when you tell your child that, you are a beautiful creature of God, you don't say, or at least that's what I believe, and but don't take that too seriously. Or there might be any aspect of our lives of faith and family, etc., where it doesn't even occur to us that we don't know that God created this beautiful child, or that God wants this person to flourish, et cetera, et cetera. So I want to challenge that double-mindedness a little bit in this talk. And I want to do it by developing two insights that I think Abraham had. One of his insights was in theology to accept the Aristotelian principle of epistemic fit, as he called it. And basically, I think that the way to get the idea there is that Aristotle thought that different things in different ways. And so the way say, geometry or mathematics is different from the way like something about the empirical world, like biology or something like that. And different from the way what's right or wrong, or different from the way other persons. And so the principle of epistemic fit basically says, don't confuse the proper methodology for knowing one kind of subject area with the proper methodology for knowing a different kind of subject area. So I think that sort of animates his some of that's like an animating theme of some of Abraham's work. The way it applies to religious belief is don't take, like, so for example, a geometrical or mathematical model for knowing, say, theorems in Euclidean geometry for how you would know that God exists and God creates the is creator, some such thing as that. I mean, if you adopted that geometrical model for, like, say, how do I know my wife or know my husband or know my children, you wouldn't get very far, right? And the solution, the conclusion you'd come to is not that, well, I guess I don't know my wife, I don't know my children. No, it'd be like, well, bad model for understanding that kind of knowledge, right? So maybe something like that is going on, you know, in some moments anyway, with religious belief. So another theme that you find in Abraham's work that I want to develop is that people who are interested in questions of faith and rationality should keep up with contemporary epistemology, because a lot of the sort of general kind of considerations or lines of thought that could undermine somebody's idea that they have a rational or reasonable faith, or that they might even have knowledge of God. A lot of it is based on, you know, forgive me, old school epistemology. So if you don't keep up with recent advances of epistemology, you might think that, like, you're like towing the line of what it means to be intellectually respectable, when in point of fact, that's like, oh, that's kind of like 1950s what you're saying there, you know. And so Abraham wanted to keep us up to date with, like, recent advances in epistemology. I could say recent trends in contemporary epistemology, but I say recent advances because I endorse these trends. Like, these seem right to me. So I'm going to take you through some of those trends, or as I'd say, advances. I'm not going to defend them because it would take too long to defend them, but I'm just going to kind of like report on them, and then I invite you to think about how they might be applied to the question of religious belief or religious knowledge. Okay. All right. So where's my clicker? Here it is. Okay. So is that going to happen? All right. Well, anyway, I don't know why the F1 is up there, but yeah, no, that's not me. That's not me. No, but it. So that's that's a beautiful slide there. It's the last beautiful slide you're going to see in this presentation. So I want to start just by reminding us of the problem of religious diversity, because I think that I'm not going to talk a lot about this until the end, but just keep in mind the problem of religious diversity. So it goes something like this. The first thought is, you know, this is one articulation of the problem anyway. The first thought is, it's just an accident that I'm born into a religious tradition that I am. And so it's just an accident that I have the religious beliefs that I do. If I were born into a different religious tradition, I would likely have very different religious beliefs from those I have now. Okay, that seems undeniable, pretty much. But the second thought is, moreover, I'm not in a position to argue in favor of my religious beliefs over the beliefs of other traditions, including naturalist traditions. Not in a way, anyway, that's not circular, not question-begging in some obvious way. But if those previous things are true, if it is just an accident that I have the beliefs that I do, and if I have no non-question-begging arguments in favor of those beliefs over others, then my own beliefs are not epistemically rational or reasonable. They might be practically rational, might be like they help me get along in life, but they're not epistemically rational or reasonable. Certainly, I don't know that my beliefs are true and that the others are false. So that's a pretty compelling argument, but it's one of those arguments that doesn't just have like a kind of philosophical interest to it. I mean, I think a lot of people sort of deal with that argument, that kind of like line of thought in their own thinking. Okay. Okay, so part one, some recent trends in epistemology, and then some applications to religious belief, and you can fill in as you see fit there as well. And then part two, I'll get back to that problem of religious diversity and see what it looks like after we've gone through these trends in contemporary epistemology. Okay, so the first trend I want to talk about is what I would call the rejection of narrow foundationalism. But to understand what that is, we have to take a step back and understand what foundationalism is. So foundationalism is the most common answer to a kind of regress problem. So we think that, not just anything counts as knowledge. Knowledge has to be based on good reasons or good evidence, right? But not just anything counts as good evidence. In order for your reasons or your evidence to be good, you have to have some reason for believing that that's true. Okay, but then we can ask again, what are your reasons for believing that's true? And you get a regressive justification, right? Regressive reasons. And the most common way of stopping that regress is to say, well, some knowledge kind of stands on its own, so to speak. Some knowledge has a kind of character to it that you don't need more reasons for that knowledge. You can sort of start with that knowledge, okay? So that's foundationalism. That's the basic structure of foundationalism. Now, narrow foundationalism is the idea that what goes into the foundation, so you have the foundations and you have the big superstructure on top of the foundations. Narrow foundationalism is the idea that it's what makes it as that like self-standing knowledge that you can start with, very narrow range, right? It tends to be things like simple logical truths, simple mathematical truths, things that you can just see that they're true by considering them. Also, knowledge of your own ideas, your own experience, knowledge of your own mind, right? You can kind of like just reflect on your own mind and think, oh, I'm having like a blue experience right now, or I'm having the experience of green trees and sunlight, okay? But the reason that it can stand alone and something you can start with is because it does have that subjective character. It's just like what's in my mind, it's not what's in the world, okay? The problem is to get to the other stuff, right? To get to more complicated truths in mathematics or logic, but also knowledge of the world beyond one's mind, okay? So it turns out, it took us a little too long to figure this out, but we finally figured out that that model isn't going to work because there just is no way, there's no good way to get from that narrow set of knowledge that's pretty easy, to all the knowledge that we think we have, okay? Getting from simple logic to complex logic, okay, that works pretty well. Getting from simple mathematical truths to more complex mathematical truths, go from axioms to theorems, that works out pretty well. But how do you get from knowledge of your own subjective experience to knowledge of the world beyond your mind, to knowledge of other people, etc.? Turns out there's no good way to do that. And so we reject that model, okay? So, again, famously, we reject this model to account for just common sense knowledge of the world that we think we have, okay? One way you can say that, one reason you can give for rejecting this model is that it's overly skeptical. It gives you overly skeptical results, right? It's also empirically inadequate. So it's just not true that the sort of non-inferential knowledge or the kind of knowledge that we have to start with is just restricted to that narrow set. So for example, nowadays, we don't think that perception of the external world, perception of like trees and tables, et cetera, we don't think that that's like by reasoning from sensory experience. Perception is its own kind of thing that should be in the foundations. So the way that you get from this very skeptical picture to a less skeptical picture is to broaden the foundations, broaden what you get in the foundations, okay? So now the next trend I want to talk about is rejection of internalism. So what's internalism? Well, the big idea is that knowledge is entirely a function of what goes on in one's mind. Okay, so like stuff that you can reflect on, for example, the nature of your own experience, etc. Even better, it's not so much that knowledge is entirely a function of what goes on in the mind, it's that the quality of knowledge, what makes knowledge better than mere opinion, is entirely a function of what goes on in one's mind. So for example, sensory experience is something that it's okay on an internalist perspective. You can know what your own sensory experience is, the quality of your own experience, because that's just going on inside your own mind. There's also reasoning that's going on in your own mind. So you can get from sensory experience and then reason from there, see where that gets you, okay? The problem with internalism comes in when you try to get from sensory experience, again, to objects in the world. How do you get, just by the reasoning going on in your own mind and the experience in your own mind, how do you get to something that's beyond your own mind, okay? Well, the classic answer for the internalist is that you make an inference, right? You use your reasoning to infer to the other object that's outside your mind. Problem is again, it took us a little too long to figure this out, but that doesn't work. There is no inference from, there's no good inference, no non-circular inference, no non-gappy inference from sensory experience to objects in the world. So you go from the hope of internalism, everybody's smiling, to the rejection of internalism. Turns out, oh, I can't know objects in the world. I have the dog frowning too, because we don't want just to know, we want to be known as well, and the dog wants to be known. So the dog doesn't like this picture either. Okay, so again, what's the lesson here? The lesson isn't skepticism, right? The lesson isn't, okay, I don't know that my dog exists. I only know that the idea of my dog exists. That's not the lesson. The lesson is that this is a bad model, right? So we reject internalism in favor of what now goes by externalism. Now we're externalists, okay? Another lesson is that, so for example, in perception, that the reason that perception is not just a function, or I should say, the reason that perceptual knowledge is not just a function of what's going on in the mind is because the difference between good perception and bad perception also involves how well are your perceptual faculties meshing with the external environment, with the physical environment, right? And there's empirical grounding for this understanding as well, because it turns out that our perceptual faculties are specifically designed to work in the kind of physical environments that we're in. So if you're in an environment that's not respecting the parameters that your perception was designed to work with, that's where you get perceptual illusions. Perceptual illusions basically happen when the parameters that constrain just normally functioning perception are not in place. You get perceptual illusions, okay? So again, cognitive science is helpful here to tell us that if you really want to understand how perception works, or what's the difference between good perception and bad perception, you can't just think about what's going on in the mind. You have to think about the relationship of the mind to the physical environment. Okay. Okay, here's a big one. The project of explanation versus the project of vindication. So the project of explanation is the project of trying to understand what is knowledge, how do we know the things that we do know, and specifically, how do beings like us, designed the way we are, know the world that we're actually situated in? So how do beings like us, situated as we are, get to know the things that we know? And so again, this is like an empirically informed project. You can't just ignore, you can't just do it from the armchair. You have to sort of know, well, what's, you look to You look to cognitive science. You look to what people say about social cognition, for example, to get a handle on how you know other minds or other persons, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so the project of explanation is both optimistic. It kind of starts with the assumption that we know lots of things, and the project is to explain how we do know those things. So it's optimistic. It's also empirically informed. Like I said, you don't just like from the armchair figure this out. You engage whatever empirical disciplines make sense in order to answer that question. Okay. So the project of explanation is the project of Plato's Theaetetus, what is knowledge, or Plato's Meno, why do we value knowledge more than mere opinion? It's answering how questions, answering why questions. Okay. The project of vindication is not to explain how we have the knowledge that we do. The project of vindication is to prove or show or demonstrate that we do have knowledge that we do, okay? But it's not just any kind of proving or showing. It's proving or showing in the context of doubt. So the project of vindication is to show someone that you know, but to show someone who doubts that you know, okay? And that person who doubts that you know might be yourself, right? You might think like, oh, do I know what I think, right? And so but no, there's a kind of like debate going on. Somebody's playing the role of the skeptic. I don't think you know anything. You're playing the role of the person trying to prove to the skeptic that you do know what you think you know, okay? So it has the rhetorical features of a debate. One of the primary rhetorical features of a debate is that you're not allowed to assume things that are up for question within the context of the debate. So if you've got a skeptic who like knows how to play the game, anytime you start to make ground in showing that you know, the skeptic's going to say, well, I don't accept that your premises, right? So what you get is limited premises that the skeptic will allow, and then inferences that the skeptic will allow, reasoning that the skeptic will allow, to knowledge of the world, other minds, et cetera, right? So contemporary epistemology rejects the project of vindication as just a misguided, essentially flawed project. Like, don't play that game, okay? So the analogy is to geometry, okay? Suppose you're pretty good at geometry, and somebody says, look, I want you to prove these theorems in Euclidean geometry, but you can only use 3 out of the 5 axioms, okay? Well, if you know anything about geometry, you're not going to be able to do it, okay? Does that show anything about your knowledge of geometry? Does it show anything about your ability to prove the theorems of Euclidean geometry? No, it doesn't. It just shows that you've entered into this silly game of trying to prove theorems with only 3 of the 5 axioms that are needed to prove the theorems, right? So the idea is that if you failed at this game, which you would, it has no epistemic implications at all. It has no implications about what you know in geometry. It just has implications about the way the debate has been set up, and you're only allowed to use certain premises, okay? That's what's going on here, okay? And that's why the project of vindication is a silly project, okay? Again, it took us too long to figure that out, but we finally figured it out. Okay. You can think of the religious application here, right? I want you to prove to me that you know God, or that you know these propositions that you think you know about God, but I'm not going to allow you any of the sources of knowledge that you would actually take as a source of knowledge in this domain. So don't use revelation. Don't use religious experience. Don't use anything that I'm not going to accept as a naturalist who's not going to, I'm not going to accept any of those sources, right? So you can see how you can get into this same kind of frustrating game with religious belief. But this frustrating game is not going to just like prevent you from showing that you know God. It's going to prevent you from showing that you know there are trees outside, or that the person beside you is conscious, or something like that. Okay. So again, the limited premises, knowledge of your own ideas. How do you get from that limited premises that the skeptic will allow to everything else? Okay, well, you can start to see a pattern here, right? Internalism, narrow foundationalism, project of vindication. The limited premises that the skeptic will allow in the project of vindication are pretty much what's allowed in the narrow foundations of knowledge, which is pretty much what the internalist will allow. All knowledge must be grounded in. So this is kind of a package deal. Contemporary epistemology rejects this package deal. It's not taken seriously anymore. Okay, one more trend that I want to talk about is the social turn in epistemology. Just to go through this quickly. So the social turn in epistemology basically takes us from a starting point, which is very much an individualist perspective. So traditional epistemology, especially in the Western tradition, has been a very individualist perspective. It asks questions like, it's the Cartesian question is up front. What can I know? How do I know? What evidence do I have to proceed with? Social epistemology asks analogous questions, but now the question is, how is it possible that we know the kinds of things that we know? Or what does our evidence look like? And in a way, it's also asking, no, not in a way, it's front and center asking, what kind of social environments, what kind of like ways that we organize our community are going to promote knowledge, and which ways are going to undermine knowledge, right? What kinds of social organizations help us to get the epistemic goods that we want? What kinds of social organizations are going to undermine that? So this social turn in epistemology just makes epistemology now an incredibly rich field, because now you're not just thinking about individuals and their individual psychology. Now you're talking about the place of individual in a broader social community, and how do our epistemic lives connect to the broader social environment or the broader community that we inhabit. And what that and what I've been arguing is that this social turn in epistemology, it's really just follows naturally from a rejection of internalism, right? Because notice that the lesson behind rejecting internalism, the lesson of adopting like this more externalist perspective, was that knowledge can't be understood just about what's going on in the mind. You need an enabling physical environment. So for perceptual knowledge, it's not just like what your perceptual faculties are doing. You get the perceptual knowledge only when you have an enabling physical environment. Well, social epistemology is just extending that idea to the social environment, right? It's like not only are we only getting the epistemic goods when we're in the right relationship to the physical environment, for much of our knowledge, that's going to be true of our relationship to the social environment as well. Okay. So it's taking seriously the idea that we're social animals, and that in order for beings like us to flourish both practically but also epistemically or intellectually, we have to have an enabling social environment, just like we have to have an enabling physical environment. Okay. Once you take that turn, you start to see the importance of healthy epistemic communities, the role of epistemic expertise within a community, the role of intellectual or epistemic authority, the role of formal and informal teaching to disseminate knowledge within a community, the importance of trust relations. One thing that I'm really interested in, which to me is like just fascinating dimension of social epistemology, is to understand how our epistemic relations are always so much on top of, not always, that's an exaggeration, how so often our epistemic relations are like on top of piggybacking on trust relations, okay? So think about the way, you know, what newspapers you trust, or what teachers you trust, or what authorities you trust, right? So to work out, like, what's the difference between reasonable trust that actually enables us to know a lot more than we would ever know without it, versus a kind of blind trust that would be sort of epistemically undermining? That's a fascinating question. It's one of the main questions of social epistemology, okay? Another very important theme here is the division of epistemic labor. And that goes back, you know, again, it's a way that we're leaving the individualist perspective. From the individualist perspective, self-sufficiency is the name of the game, right? What you really want to be is self-sufficient. You really want to be independent of other persons for what you know, okay? But again, the social turn in epistemology is like grabbing on to the idea that that's just not how social beings like ourselves do it. We are as dependent on each other in the broader aspects of our social environment. For our intellectual successes, we're as dependent on that as we are for our practical successes. Just like none of us like makes it alone, practically speaking, we don't make it alone intellectually speaking either. So you can start to think about how a healthy religious community would also show these dimensions of relationships of proper trust, division of labor, etc. Okay. All right. Okay. How am I doing here? Oh, much better than I thought I would be. Okay. When did I start? Noon? You sure about that? Okay. No, actually, I'm doing really well here. Okay. So, all right. So just to get an idea of some of the ramifications here of taking this social turn, let's compare two scientific communities. Actually, that's the wrong way to put it. It's just two populations. Okay. So suppose, for the sake of argument, that our current science has a good understanding of infectious diseases. In particular, our scientists now understand how the rhinovirus causes the common cold, say. Okay, trying to be uncontroversial here, right? We understand now how our scientists do, division of labor idea. Okay, our scientists understand how the rhinovirus causes the common cold, why lack of sleep and good nutrition increases the likelihood of infection, how a viral infection can sometimes lead to a secondary bacterial infection, how this can sometimes cause pneumonia, and how pneumonia can sometimes lead to death. Okay, we know all that. We understand all that. That is, our scientists do. I surely don't understand it. Like I don't think I know the difference between bacteria and virus. I mean, I know they're both really small, and I know that one reacts to antibiotics and the other doesn't. But like that's about as far as my knowledge goes here. Okay, but there are other people who know and understand a lot more about this stuff. Okay, so imagine that all that's true. Okay. And imagine another population that believes that the common colds and other diseases are caused by bad spirits. Okay, and their experts tell them that. Okay, so you've got two different communities with two very different understandings of the common cold, its causes, etc. Okay. So I want to say all of these things can be true. And in fact, not only can they be true, to me it's kind of obvious that they're true, okay? So one thing that's true is many non-scientists, such as me, in our society, do not share the foregoing understanding regarding infectious diseases. For example, many people in our society don't understand how the rhinovirus causes the common cold, or how viral infections sometimes lead to secondary bacterial infections, okay? So here we're seeing a distinction between knowledge and understanding. Understanding is knowledge how, knowledge why. It's like understanding gives you like the explanation for how things work, okay? Knowledge is more episodic than that. I can know that the cat is on the mat without understanding why the cat is on the mat. Like, how did it get there, right? Why is it there? I can have the knowledge that it's there without the understanding of why or how, right? There's also a division of labor here, right? I said, as part of the example, the scientists understand all this stuff, but many of us non-scientists don't, okay? Nevertheless, this is also true. Many such people know quite a bit about the common cold. For example, that people catch colds, that lack of sleep and good nutrition can increase the likelihood of infection. Even I know that. And the common cold can sometimes lead to pneumonia. Yeah, I've heard that before. I think that's right. So, again, there's the role of expertise at work here. There's formal and informal teaching, testimony. How did I come to know these things, right? Well, that's how I come to know the role of expertise, formal and informal teaching, etc. Okay. In some societies, many people share much of our knowledge about the common cold, even if they lack that understanding. For example, many people who believe falsely that the common cold is caused by evil spirits, they nevertheless know that people catch colds. I'm sure a lot of them realize that lack of sleep and good nutrition increases the likelihood of infection. They just think it attracts evil spirits. And that colds can sometimes develop into something worse, you know? You let one bad spirit in, they're going to invite a worse spirit in, okay? So in other words, they have their explanations for how these, but they certainly know those things, right? They certainly can know those things, even though they don't have the understanding behind it, right? So knowledge doesn't require understanding and is even compatible with misunderstanding, right? Someone who thinks that the cold is caused by an evil spirit can perfectly know that they have a cold, right? So here's an important slide. So all this is so even if there's no non-question begging arguments in favor of the germ theory of disease over the spirit theory of disease. So in other words, even if there's no possibility of a non-circular vindication of the one theory over the other in a context of doubt and dispute, okay? So knowledge, again, does not require that kind of non-circular, non-question begging vindication. So why might there be no non-circular vindication available? Well, there could be any number of reasons, but one would be that there are no neutral grounds available to establish one theory over the other. So maybe there's no evidence that would be recognized by both sides as compelling evidence, okay? Does that mean that scientific methodology is not reliable in the domain of epidemiology? No, it doesn't. Okay. All right. You can imagine a similar application to the religious domain where you have two competing religions with competing beliefs, different division of labor, different explanations about the relationship between human and divine, or creation and the creator. And the point is that there can perfectly well exist lots of knowledge in both communities, even if at some points there's disagreement. And the fact that that disagreement can't be resolved in a non-circular, non-question begging way doesn't mean that the ones who have it right don't have it right and don't enjoy the kind of understanding that they do on the basis of that, okay? So I feel like the reason I know a lot about the germ theory of disease is because I happen to have been born in the right place in the right time to benefit from other people's understanding of the germ theory of disease, right? So that's, again, a kind of like externalism is coming in there. You know, it just doesn't depend on just what's going on in my mind. It's like, how am I related to the broader community? The social turn is involved there, etc. Okay. Okay, so back to the problem of religious diversity. So just to recall the problem, the first thought is that it's just an accident that I'm born into the religious tradition that I am, and that seems right. I'm a little more skeptical about the "and so," just an accident that I have the religious belief that I do. Is it really just an accident? I mean, isn't that kind of like discounting the great social achievement that we have as a Christian community in terms of the amount of learning that is rooted in the Christian community and the division of labor that has the ability to disseminate knowledge, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a great social achievement. So it's not just an accident that I have the belief that I do. I mean, you know, give Aquinas, you know, some credit here, or give some of the other church fathers some credit here, and give a lot of people who aren't as famous some credit there. Okay. Okay, but let's let that pass. Okay. So, second thought, I'm not in a position to argue in favor of my religious beliefs over the beliefs of other traditions, not in a way that's not circular and non-question begging. Okay. I think that's exactly right. That's exactly right. What I hope I've been able to show is that that doesn't have much epistemic import. That's not a reason to think that your epistemic position is compromised. So go to the third point. The third point was that if those previous things are true, that if it is just an accident that I was born here rather than someplace else, if I don't have any non-circular, non-question begging way to defend my beliefs against those of another tradition, well, that then my own beliefs are not epistemically rational or reasonable. It doesn't follow. If that were true, we'd get a lot more skepticism than just in the religious domain. Okay. Certainly, I don't know that my beliefs are true and that the others are false. It just doesn't follow. So the problem of religious diversity is, I think, trading on certain outdated understandings of the epistemology of belief, not just the epistemology of religious belief, but the epistemology of belief in general. Okay. So what I want to leave you with is the problem of scientific diversity. How many people would accept this argument? It's just an accident that I'm born into the scientific tradition that I am, and so just an accident that I have the scientific beliefs that I do. If I were born into a different tradition, I would likely have very different beliefs from those I have now. For example, that the common cold is caused by a bad spirit rather than by a virus. Moreover, I'm not in a position to argue in favor of my scientific beliefs over the beliefs of other traditions, not in a way that's not circular, not question begging. But if those things are true, then my scientific beliefs are not epistemically rational or reasonable. Certainly, I do not know that my beliefs are true and that the others are false. For example, I don't know that the common cold is caused by a virus. Well, I certainly do know that the common cold is caused by a virus. So there's something wrong with that argument. That's the same argument as this argument. Okay? So now I certainly haven't proven or shown that religious belief is rational or that you have knowledge of God. I haven't shown that. But what I have shown is that that's not a problem. The argument, the problem isn't there. Okay. Okay, if you've got a problem, if you want to say, well, okay, but there is a difference. There is a difference. Okay, I haven't shown you there's no difference, but it's not that difference. These are the same argument. Okay. All right. The million-dollar question. Well, but how do you know that you're in a good case rather than the bad case, right? How do you know that your tradition is the one that is benefiting from this knowledge and understanding and is therefore in the preferable position of having, a healthy epistemic community standing behind your beliefs? Better way to put the question, from my point of view, is how do you understand that you're in a good case rather than a bad case? Because this is like a how do you know question. This is asking for an explanation. Or again, even better, I would say, how do we understand that we're in a good case rather than a bad case? Okay. So, the answer is the same way you know or understand anything else, by bringing all resources to bear to build up an understanding of our world and of our place in it. All epistemic hands are on deck for that project of building up a worldview, your understanding of your world and your place in the world. So bring all resources that you think you have available to get at the facts. And when you're doing that, don't fall back into narrow foundationalism or internalism or the project of vindication. Those are dead ends. Okay, that's it. Thanks. Okay.
We've got about 15 minutes or so for Q&A. Right over here.
Check. Thanks very much for your talk and presentation. I appreciate it. Glad you're able to join us today. My question centers on the role of empirical testing and falsifiability for your argument. So I think about the difference between the person who claims that the common cold is caused by rhinovirus versus the person who claims that the common cold is caused by evil spirits. Because the first person can say, and I know I'm going to demonstrate this because I'm going to expose group A to rhinovirus and not group B, and we're going to observe more colds in group A. And if we see that, then it's support for my hypothesis, right? The person who says colds are caused by evil spirits can perform no such test, right? There's nothing that that person can do to say, let me demonstrate for you an outcome that is compatible with my thesis. Is that an important intellectual difference between those two types of claims? And how does that fit into your argument?
Okay, good. I'm going to backtrack to a slide because I think if I made my slide correctly, it's going to be part of the answer. Yeah. Okay, I wish I'd been a little bit more careful there. So let me just invoke. All right, I just want you to have God looking down on you as I. All right, so it's good, very good question. Okay, so I think my essential thought here, okay, is not that our best scientists could not demonstrate the superiority of the germ theory of disease over the spirit theory of disease. Okay, the thought I was really going for was that I don't have that ability because I don't have the understanding that our best scientists do, where I could explain why my tradition is right and this other tradition is wrong. So that was the essential point I was going for, because I'm interested in sort of the person in the pew, like not the doctor of the church, right? But your question is more about the doctors of the church, right? The experts. So let's switch to that. Okay. And I would say yes and no. By our standards of science, by the standards of scientific methodology, by the norms of scientific methodology, clearly our people would beat their people. Okay. But would their people necessarily like cave? There might be all kinds of reasons that they wouldn't, right? Maybe they think that spirits are a little more cagey than that, and sort of built in, to the spirits that part of their purpose is to deceive us, etc. Right? I mean, there's moves that can be made within that worldview, right? Now, would they be moves that we would think are reasonable moves to make? No, but they might be deemed as reasonable moves from their point of view. Okay. Now, it's important to understand here, I'm not going relativistic. I'm not saying, and therefore their beliefs are just as good as ours. That's actually like the opposite of my point. My point is that their beliefs are not as good as ours. Okay. They don't, for one, they don't respect the norm, the epistemic norms that really should be in play here in this domain. But do I have a non-question begging, non-circular way to make that argument? I feel like the answer is no. I'm very confident in making that argument because I'm very confident that scientific method is a much more reliable method here than sort of, I don't know, whatever method you're using to deal with spirits, right?